For me, housing is a necessity for life. You need to live in a house. But right now, house prices are so high and history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I couldn't think of much worse than buying an overpriced house right now, working so hard to afford it, feeling amazing when you buy it, and then just seeing all of the value crash to what it actually is worth. Yes, you want a nice house, but if you're looking to buy a house because to make money or to build wealth, then I guarantee you there are better ways to generate wealth than buying a house.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Orange Peel podcast. I'm your host, Nicki, and today we're diving into a topic that almost every single young person worldwide is stressing about right now. We're going to be answering the question of whether or not you should chase the dream of owning a home, or if there's another path that you can go down. We've grown up hearing that the ultimate goal in life, the American dream, in fact, is to buy a house, to get on the property ladder, and somehow that equals success. What if that ladder itself is broken? What if being house poor is actually the worst thing you can do? What if it's keeping you trapped, stressed, and basically just broke? To peel back these questions, I'm joined by Fin, who you probably know online as Cambridge Hodl. He is the founder of a community called Sovereign Kind, and he's been digging into what financial sovereignty means in a Bitcoin world for Gen Z. This episode is called Chasing Homes or Stacking Sats, and I think it's going to challenge a lot of the assumptions that we've all been fed. So let's get into this. Fin, thanks so much for coming on. I am so excited to ask you some of these questions.
Amazing intro. Thank you very much. Looking forward to getting into it and chatting all things housing, Bitcoin, and Gen Z and sovereignty.
Important stuff. So before we really get into it, why don't you tell us a bit about how you started with Bitcoin and maybe what you're doing over at your channel at Cambridge Hodl?
Sure. I first heard about Bitcoin back in 2018 from a friend at school. So we just left school and there were rumors going around that two guys that we went to school with had made 100,000 in crypto. So I reached out to one of them and said, "Can I pick your brains and have a coffee?" And met him for a coffee, but it was too overwhelming for me just to make the decision between Binance and Coinbase at the time. So stupidly, maybe I left it because I didn't want to risk losing money and didn't know enough and didn't do any more research. And then struggled through the next few years. And then COVID came where I was just job hopping, trying to find what I wanted. I knew I didn't want to go to university, even though I ended up going for a term. But I didn't want to do that conventional path and kept kind of hopping around until I got injured, found a online community to help others build an online business, online coaching business. So I was going to help other people that are in my situation. And within that community, I came across my now mentor in the space who was running a course called Take the Cry Out of Crypto. And at the time, I thought it was a get rich quick, make money off crypto course. So I jumped at it straight away. And it was the complete opposite of what I paid for and came for, but it was exactly what I needed. So it was all on Bitcoin fundamentals, the differences between Bitcoin and crypto, how to be safe, how to secure your Bitcoin so it's not on an exchange, all of those fundamentals. And the best bit was it wasn't just Bitcoin and as a number go up technology. It wasn't just buy Bitcoin and it will go up. It was really the fundamentals of it. And then also started piquing curiosity enough about money to go and study money further. So while the course was still running, started thinking pretty seriously about Bitcoin as a vehicle. And then since that journey, it was kind of just accumulate like a madman as much as I could. And then obviously whilst you're accumulating, you want to just keep upping your knowledge as much as you can. So that's just led down all the rabbit holes that you could think of. And it got to a point about 6 months ago, I think, funnily enough, speaking to my mentor again after we'd not spoken for a while, that it became clear that it had had such a massive impact on my life in a pretty short time period, but it had such a massive impact that I wanted to pair the knowledge that I'd been accumulating from him and all the rabbit holes that I'd been down, combine that with the skills that I'd learned from building an online business and form the two to create something that really fits my vision and aligns with what I want in the future, which ultimately is helping other people. And who am I best to serve? I'm best to serve myself and myself for the last 5 years. So Gen Z, people who I believe are the worst off, but a lot in the best position to take advantage of the amazing opportunity that we're seeing right in front of us.
Yeah, I mean, stemming off that a bit, it's all about mindset. I think that's what I got from what you said there. So, before we even talk numbers, how do you define freedom for Gen Z?
For Gen Z, and compared to what I think freedom is, I think for a lot of Gen Z, it's probably a completely different thing. For me, freedom is to provide value to the world, but in a way that aligns with your values and your vision. So being able to give time to projects and companies and work that you want to do rather than you have to do to pay your bills and to stay alive. Within that, I think it's important to live. It's important to enjoy the world for what it is. And I'm not the greatest traveler. I like to have my base and be set there. But my vision for freedom is to see the world, have amazing experiences and stories ultimately to tell your grandkids. So I think that's my vision of freedom, and hopefully more Gen Z's vision for freedom as time goes on.
I mean, I agree 100%. There's nothing more important than being in a place where you're able to contribute meaningfully to the world and actually like what you're doing. And especially if that's making you money. Right? Being able to do what you love and making money doing it is probably one of the biggest blessings you can have. So you've created this community, Sovereign Kind. And before I ask you, what that is, I really, really did love the name. So what does that mean to you? What is true sovereignty?
It's actually got a fairly big backstory to it. About a year ago, I fell into a network marketing company, and I love the product and I love the company. Network marketing itself didn't align, but whilst I was in network marketing, three of us that were from the same community beforehand wanted to create our own community. So it wasn't just about the company and the product, it was about a bigger picture. And me and one other actually came up with the name Sovereign Kind because it's kind of like humankind, that kind of catchphrase. Kind can also be seen as being a nice, good person. And then sovereign being family minded, free, self sovereign, and being in control. So that's where the name came from. And then pretty soon after, unfortunately, I decided to stop. Another guy decided to stop, and one guy's still going. But he went his own route. And this name was just in my mind constantly, but with no home. So I'd been battling for a good 6 months, I think, about I want to help Gen Z to see the world differently and see the opportunity that's in front of them. But I didn't know the best way to go about how to do that. So after too long of just consuming more and more knowledge, I wanted to create something. I wanted to start creating publicly where my skills are just going to develop. So it's early stages, but the vision just to start with is to have a hub where people that do see the vision or do have an inkling of interest to explore further can come together. There's no plans around monetization at the moment. There's no plans about really funneling people to it. It's very much so just a container there that people can come in, feel safe to ask questions, and really start building Gen Z and a safe space where people can learn, put their thoughts out there, and feel heard, really.
So for someone who is, in Gen Z and maybe they're starting to question traditional money systems, where does Sovereign Kind kind of fit into that equation?
Good question. So, again, initially, when I was thinking about all this, my plan was just to be Bitcoin only. This is how you get Bitcoin. This is how you secure your Bitcoin. Don't sell your Bitcoin. I had some really good conversations with a few people. And if we just keep, and this is, I'm not saying that, say, your channel or other people that are pushing Bitcoin only, that is needed, definitely needed. And I can't thank you guys enough because you're so much better at doing it than me. The angle that I'm trying to go towards is really highlighting the problem. So publicly, I'll be highlighting the problem, and it won't necessarily all tie to Bitcoin. It will just be focusing on the problem. And then once people come into the sovereign kind ecosystem, there'll be more in-depth space to ask and find out and learn about problem, which will naturally lead to the solution. And I think that's ultimately where Bitcoin sits. And then within there, they can have a safe space where they can ask any questions. They can kind of sieve and sort through the noise, because that it will be quite a high signal group that's not got all these trading calls or any of that stuff. It's sovereign kind for a reason, not trading kind. And there'll be people like yourself, people like other Gen Zers that get it in there, that can answer questions, be of help, and most importantly, in my opinion, be safe, because it's a simple space to operate in, but it gets overcomplicated and there's a lot of fear. So to make things as smooth and understandable and safe as possible, where people can come in with curiosity and hopefully stay in, but come out of the process being much clearer and then ultimately much more positive for the future too.
Yeah, I mean that's super important, right? YouTube channels are great. They're a great place to learn, but you've got to be asking these questions. I mean, I myself I have so many questions to ask when I'm doing my research for every single one of these episodes. So, thanks for putting a space together. I think that is really needed for Gen Z. We need to feel like we have some kind of community. And with that being said, though, let's move into the meat of this episode. I want to talk about the challenge and the choice that most people face. Should I save for a house, or should I, look at Bitcoin? Should I have my dream kind of shifted to stacking sats? What is even the point of saving for a house?
You've got to be curious. That is my number
Okay.
one. Be open-minded and curious, because no matter who tells you what, you're always going to come to your own conclusion. But I think the main limiting belief or mindset that you've got to get through is, my thoughts borrowed from someone else, or are my thoughts impacted upon other people's beliefs, or are they my own? Have I built up this belief that I need to buy a house? For me, housing is a necessity for life. You need to live in a house. But right now, house prices are so high, and history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I couldn't think of much worse than buying an overpriced house right now, working so hard to afford it, feeling amazing when you buy it, and then just seeing all of the value crash to what it actually is worth. So I think you've just got to be curious. There's going to be good deals to come up. It might change your life to own a house. Everyone has different situations that they live in, but don't go and buy a house just because someone's told you to, or that's the way that you think is the best way. Have a look at what's going on, what other comparisons you can have, because I think people just think they have to buy a house and that's the only way that they can live. You don't have to buy anything.
I mean, one thing that I used to believe, I don't believe as much anymore now since learning about Bitcoin, but I used to think that a house was a store of value, right? You didn't want to have your money in the bank because of inflation that kept losing its value, but you put it into a house. Real estate is always painted as an investment. I mean, is there anything you have to say to contradict that? Why do you think that so many Gen Z are still believing this with such conviction?
Yeah. It's worth saying that it's a better store of value than saving your cash in a bank account. That's for sure. And for the last 20, 30, 40 years, it has been a good store of value, because house prices have gone from 50,000 for a house that's now worth 500,000. But when did that happen? Houses are for living in, they're not for saving in. So for me, yes, you want a nice house, but if you're looking to buy a house because to make money or to build wealth, then I guarantee you there are better ways to generate wealth than buying a house. So that's what I have to say for that one.
And for someone who's maybe thinking of, starting from zero, no investments, they're thinking of maybe the first thing they want to do is start real estate, maybe saving up for a house. Why would Bitcoin be a better play than chasing that property ladder?
Yeah, so I think I could talk for hours on this, but if we try and break it down really simply, to buy a house, typically you would save money until you have enough for a deposit, 5, 10%, and put the deposit down. The process of saving for a deposit is long enough that that money that you're putting in a savings account is losing value before you can even buy your deposit. So even if you were set on buying a house, then you're better off saving for the deposit in Bitcoin and in a savings account where Bitcoin's growing on average for the last 10 years, 50% a year. That is kind of how I looked at it when I first found Bitcoin. I still had in my mind that I desperately want a house. So you could argue I wasn't fully orange pilled. I was just going to use Bitcoin to save for a house deposit faster. Now, when I started really understanding money because of the rabbit holes that I went down, I started realizing that this narrative that you build wealth through a house, through either flipping your house or buying it, selling it, and then getting a next one, or renting it out and getting your next one, it just doesn't compete against Bitcoin. And then when you understand that and you can start building your Bitcoin stack to a sizable position that you could buy a house through a deposit, or if you could just buy the house outright, you also understand there's much better ways to use that Bitcoin than to sell it for fiat and buy a house. Now, that's not to say that you can't still buy a house, but when you become more aware of money and the tools that Bitcoin can provide, something like leveraging your Bitcoin to buy a house is an option. And we're still so early that if you start now, by the time you can afford a deposit or can afford a house, there's going to be so many tools, so many vehicles that you can use your Bitcoin as leverage, as collateral, or something along those lines to enable you to have a house, but still own the Bitcoin, which in my opinion is the most important thing.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like it. I think time and Bitcoin is probably the only way that I would consider buying a house. But a lot of people that I know, a lot of my econ profs in uni talk about good debt. They talk about how it can actually be beneficial to put yourself into what's called a smart debt. A mortgage is, a very commonly used example of that. I mean, do you think that that's true at all? Or is debt just like a shackle of the fiat system?
Yeah, I've got split opinions on this topic because I think there is a very compelling case to just opt out of the system completely and just be on a Bitcoin standard. The problem we have is the system is still here and there is leverage of the current system to help you get further ahead. Buying a house with a mortgage is a liability because each month you have to pay your mortgage. However, buying property to let could be an asset if that puts money in your pocket every month. However, if you're using leverage like this, again, there's better tools that can make you money much faster where you use leverage. Because effectively, it's what Michael Saylor's doing with strategy, right? I know they've changed slightly what they're doing, but you're effectively leveraging and going short the dollar, and you are acquiring or going long Bitcoin, which appreciates in value. So that's kind of the same approach to what a rental property would be, except the returns are significantly higher with not having to deal with tenants, not having to deal with taxes, not having to deal with a call at 3 a.m. when there's a leak in the house, not having to deal with any of the headaches that come with property, and an outsized return. So I hope that kind of makes sense. However, I think there's games to be played, but you have to be extremely careful with leverage and Bitcoin. You can use it to acquire more Bitcoin, but I also really like the case for just operating fully on a Bitcoin standard and leaving those fiat games behind you, because ultimately, just by stacking Bitcoin and saving in Bitcoin, you can get ahead faster without any leverage or without any mortgage than if you were playing those games. So I think there's a very strong case for just sticking to your lane, saving in Bitcoin, and letting that do the work for you.
Yeah, you mentioned some of those, the costs, the mortgage, with tenant calls, and you have something to fix. What are some of the hidden costs that come with buying a home that, people usually don't discuss or don't see?
Yeah, I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves talking about some of this stuff because for me anyway, and for Gen Z, I'm sure a lot of Gen Z, getting a house is hard enough, let alone getting multiple and leveraging the house and
Yeah,
all of this stuff. But
yeah.
for me, the number one thing that put me off property was I couldn't see myself affording even a deposit for the house. So what that naturally led for me to do was save less every month, because I couldn't see that if I was putting as much as possible aside, that I was making any meaningful progress to get towards that deposit. When I then understood Bitcoin, I then was suddenly saving as much as I could to get further ahead. So I think the hidden costs or unseen costs or problems with property are, aside from price, well, it all links back to price, I guess, but you save for a deposit. So you spend all your time, all your hard earned money put towards a deposit. You get your house, then you've got a mortgage. So what that does that mean? That means you've got this stress that you have to make your mortgage payments every month. When interest rates are high or mortgage interest rates are high, a lot of that monthly payment is actually just paying off interest. It's not even paying off the house. So again, when you run the numbers, I don't think people see this. They think, I'm buying a £500,000 house. I'm paying off my mortgage. So at the end of it, I've got a £500,000 house. Yes, you've got your £500,000 house at the end of it, but you might have paid $1 million because of interest to get there. So that's one unseen thing. The other thing is, for me, travel, being able to explore. If you do want to do that, you could rent it out, is the argument, but there's headaches that come with that. If there's, I know we spoke about it a bit earlier, but house prices are so high at the moment. I can't see them going up and up for forever, for sure. But for the next 5 years, I think is in their limit. So that's another thing. What if all of your money is in your house and then it crashes and you still have to pay this mortgage for the value of the house when it's not worth that? Where does that leave you financially? And more so, where does that leave you mentally? Because then you are literally trapped into this house because you can't sell it. And then the other thing, which I think will probably happen with our generation, is when people see the light for Bitcoin and don't want to be paying extortionate prices for houses, there's going to be less buyers or people wanting to buy. So then those that do have property, they're actually going to struggle to sell. So then they're stuck again with this house that's now less valuable than what they paid for it, despite being told that it's going to be a good investment and they're going to make good money with it. There's hundreds of other reasons, but I'll try and keep it as simple as possible.
No, that's totally fair. And I do have a question on the last point that you said about, when Bitcoin is adopted, when we kind of shift towards a Bitcoin standard, and the demonetization of houses. But the first thing I wanted to touch on was people tying all of their assets, all of their money into their house. And when the value of that goes down and they can't afford their mortgage, that's being house poor, isn't it? That's probably one of the worst things you can be. So, knowing all of these dangers, why do you think that house poorness is still so common today?
You're going to have to crop out my thinking. I think we have never known any different. I did a video on this the other day, but no Gen Z has lived when the dollar was pegged to gold. So all we know is a devaluing, debasing currency. So for people that haven't looked into it, that's the norm. So if anyone's got any knowledge or interest in financial world, they know that a house probably will store value better than saving in fiat. On top of that, ever since they were born, their grandparents, their parents have either done well in real estate or they've heard of people to do well in real estate. So our brains as kids have been brainwashed, is a strong word, but we've been told that that is what you do. And we can't blame our grandparents or parents for that because it worked for them. But that doesn't mean that it works now. But because we put our parents and our grandparents on such a pedestal, and I'm so grateful for my parents and my grandparents for everything they've done, all the support. So if they ever watch this, I'm not saying anything bad in any way. They've done really well from property. So of course they're going to pass that wisdom down to you, but it's a different world now. So I think the biggest problem for our generation is, unless you're actively seeking knowledge from other sources, that's all you're getting fed is information of buy your house. So I think there's not enough education out there. There's not enough interest and there's too much trust in listening to family members.
Yeah, not enough education, and obviously seeing things sticking to the status quo is a huge problem. But what gets me is that most of us didn't really see the 2008 housing crisis, right? We didn't see Lehman Brothers go bankrupt and them handing out subprime mortgages and all that. But our parents did. Some of our parents, they might have even been buying a home or owning a home or thinking about buying a home at that time. Shouldn't that have, created some anti-buying a house sentiment? I mean, what's going on? I feel like we've gone the opposite direction with what was expected looking at that crisis.
Yeah, you and I, plus some others, look at this stuff often. So it's on the top of our mind. And in reality, in the grand scheme of things, 2008 wasn't long ago at all. So it should still be on people's minds. But a lot has happened since then for them to forget about those bad times and fixate again on the good times. And house prices have gone up a lot in price since 2008, where people have had success again. They've forgotten about 2008. So I think that's the problem. I think people forget things that aren't in the too distant past, like they never happened.
Yeah, I guess I see that. I mean, COVID happened, and I don't know what it was like in Australia or even in the UK, but in the US, we were seeing crazy house price surges. I mean, things were going up and up and up, and everyone who had the money was buying a home. So I guess I do see that. But, you mentioned moving to a Bitcoin standard, right? I do want to talk about that. Once we adopt a Bitcoin standard, less of us are going to want to buy a house. And because of that, less supply or less demand will create excess supply, so the price will go down. Could the price going down in houses bring real estate back from being an asset to a necessity? So, less people trying to buy more and more and more to make money, to every family owning one home to live in, or maybe in renting one home to just live in.
Yeah. I think everyone's a stretch, but I see what you're asking. So this is my opinion, so it's not financial advice, and do your own research. But how I see things going, and I don't have a timeline, but this is kind of how I see things going, is Bitcoin will start sucking liquidity from these store of value assets like housing. So what that's going to do is housing is already getting cheaper if you measure it in Bitcoin. So the prices of houses are getting cheaper and cheaper in Bitcoin already, but then they'll start getting cheaper and cheaper in fiat. Maybe not in actual fiat terms, but as a percentage, that will keep getting lower and lower, which if people are saving in Bitcoin, will give them the opportunity to buy a house at a much fairer value. So to answer your question, everyone is a stretch. Those who start learning about Bitcoin now and start buying Bitcoin, stacking Bitcoin, are going to be in a much, much better situation to have a house, to own a home, to own land, whatever it is that they want, than someone who is sitting on the sidelines for the next 10 to 20 years.
But let's talk about saving a little bit. Let's talk about building those habits for stacking the sats. So if you don't mind me asking, do you have like a saving regime that you use to maximize the amount of Bitcoin that you can get?
Yeah, I'm not the person to ask about saving because I never really saved, but Bitcoin saving is a different story. So I really struggled to save before I knew about Bitcoin because I couldn't see how putting aside £500, if I could afford that a month, was going to get anywhere for what it needed to be for anything that I wanted, which obviously was a mortgage. In terms of Bitcoin, my last 3 years have probably been slightly different to what a normal person is able to do. But if anyone can emulate it, then amazing. But for me, when I first found out about Bitcoin, any money that I had, I converted straight to Bitcoin. And this was around the time that I started my online business. And fortunately, and I'll be forever grateful, I was living with my partner's parents for 2 or 3 years. A few people, a few old friends messaged me saying, yeah, but it's different for you because you lived at home, you didn't pay rent, or you paid low rent. That's true. But I lived with my partner's parents for 3 years so that I could get to the position that I am now. So what that looked like in basic terms was initially I just put as much as I could that I already had into Bitcoin. And then as my business grew, or even from day dot, but as my business grew, I would literally put everything that I earned that I didn't need. So any food money, rent money, petrol, that kind of basic stuff. Anything other than that money, I just put into Bitcoin straight away as soon as I got paid it. And because it's not like a job, you get paid when a client pays you. So it was really random, but it was just whenever I got paid, I just put everything that I didn't need into Bitcoin. And that's kind of how I went for a year, 2 years. And then what I'm doing right now is, and it's more so it's in line with, I'm doing the 75-day hard, but I made it a Bitcoin edition, and it is much more just to show people that you can do whatever amount. But right now what I'm doing is £2.10, which is like $5, 5 Aussie dollars a day, just on an auto buy. So every morning I'll wake up and it's already done, where it just buys that much each day and then put that every week into cold storage. I appreciate my circumstances are different to probably a lot of Gen Zs in terms of my rent was cheap and I wasn't working a normal job, but it coincides a lot with the book I'm reading at the moment, The Richest Man in Babylon, that if you go back to those basic fundamentals of pay yourself 10% before you then spend anything else. I first saw that kind of principle in a Robert Kiyosaki book, and it made no sense to me because I was like, how on earth am I going to make any substantial savings if I'm just saving 10%? Which is ultimately why I didn't save. If you, maybe you add a graph on the screen, but show Bitcoin's compound growth rate. If you can understand compound interest or compound investments and you see Bitcoin as the vehicle, then suddenly setting aside 10% a month, paying yourself first before anything else starts to actually make sense. And you can start to see progress pretty quickly just from making sure every month a minimum of 10% gets put aside to pay yourself in Bitcoin. I think if people start there, then they'll be off to a great start. And then any money left over, you can then add. Then hopefully you'll start going down the rabbit holes and understanding Bitcoin. And then suddenly, yes, you're paying yourself 10%. Yes, any add-ons, but then also you're working out what can I cut down on that I don't need. And you'll start having a longer time preference. So for me, I wasn't paying much rent, so I had money left over. So I could have been going out all the time. I could have been getting new clothes. I went to Tesco, which is the English version of like Kmart here, and I bought 10 black plain t-shirts and wore them for 2 years. I didn't have any clothes. I didn't buy new clothes. I wore rugby training kit that I had. I had 10 £4, $8 t-shirts, and I didn't go out for dinner. I didn't go out for meals. I didn't go out clubbing. Understood the power and the opportunity that we're in right now, which we're still in. And if anything, I think we're in a better risk adjusted time now than we were 3 years ago because of everything that's happening with the US and these treasury companies and stuff. But when you start going down the rabbit hole, you then understand the power of Bitcoin. And then you start making sacrifices, although I don't think it's a sacrifice at all for your future, to put as much money into Bitcoin as possible, as quickly as possible.
Side note here, because you talked about the power of compounding and, having time on your side. So a few weeks ago, I posted a poll on my Instagram story, right? And I asked my followers if they wanted to pick $1 million today, 8 Bitcoin today, or 1 penny over 30 days, right? So it's 1 penny that doubles over 29 days. That comes out to about 5.37 million or something like that. Crazy amount. And you wouldn't think so at first glance because it's 1 penny, it's 1 cent. So for someone who wants to understand the power of compounding, is there a place you'd recommend to start? How would you go about explaining compounding to someone who probably has no knowledge?
I'm not sure if this is an accurate recommendation, but Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow, has a bunch of practical examples of exponential growth. And although that's slightly different to compound interest, exponential growth is effectively what compound interest over a long enough time period can lead to. So I would really recommend Jeff Booth's book, The Price of Tomorrow, not only for understanding compound or compounding, but also for the world we live in right now, the effects of AI, what effects that's going to have on our life being much better, but also very different to what it looks like now. And people can make their own interpretations of what it's exactly going to look like. But AI, the effects of deflation and living in a deflationary world that we never have, humans have never lived in. And ultimately, what the answer for that is, which, spoiler alert, is Bitcoin. But exponential growth and compounding are quite hard to get your head around because it seems slow to start with, and you need to be consistent over a period of time to really see the effects. Now, I understood the concept, but really struggled with how long it was going to take with S&P 500 index investing, for example. I think I invested when I was 18 for like 4 months, and I was like, actually, this is going to take me 60 years. This is too long. When I understood that, but applied it to Bitcoin, I was like, okay, now we're talking. Let's get to this. So, but to put into perspective the exponential growth or what compound interesting can lead towards that Jeff talked about in his book was if you fold an A4 piece of paper in half 50 times, physically, obviously, it's impossible, but just imagine you could. So every time you fold it, then you fold it in half again 50 times. The distance of that paper, the thickness is from here to the sun, which is kind of, it blows your mind to the point where you
It
don't think
does.
it's true
Oh my gosh.
or that it's possible from just a bit of A4 paper. That is why so many people don't stick with compounding or anything that, and hard to wrap their head around stuff that's got exponential growth like AI does and how quickly things are changing, because that multiplying effect, once it starts taking off, is astronomical.
Yeah, 100%. I didn't know about the here to the sun thing that, wow. But even with, the penny example that I mentioned in the question, it's not until, the 27th or the 28th time that the amount of money surpasses 1 million. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
Our generation just needs to be aware that there's a problem to start with. I think they understand that it's tough. The cost of living's tough, but I think they just accept that that's what it is and that they're going to continue trudging through life. And that's just how the world is now. So I think it's just really simplifying the problem. And you did it really well in your post this week about money.
Thank you. If you could show one thing to someone who's wanting to learn about Bitcoin for the very first time, someone in Gen Z in particular, what is that one thing?
Yeah, for me, the one thing would be the big print by Larry Lepard, because what it does is summarize everything that's wrong with money in a very easy to digest way, a very easily readable book that highlights the problems and also gives a clear explanation on the best solutions.
Fix the money, fix the world, right? Incredible starting point. This has been such a great conversation. So thank you again for coming on. I mean, we've been told, or at least I've been told for as long as I can remember, that the way to measure success is by owning a home, right? There was an NBC poll that was done this week, actually, where they surveyed a bunch of Gen Z in the US, men and women, and then split it by who they voted for in the election. And a lot of them measured success in owning a home. So it's a pretty strong conviction, even for us now. And all it does is leaves us broke and stressed out. But, we've done our part in peeling back that myth. And you showed us how Bitcoin offers up us another way, one that's about sovereignty, not just status. So if you're watching this and you want to follow Fin's work, check out Sovereign Kind. I will add links to the description. I'm a part of this group. It's incredible. He sends daily emails pertaining to what goal it is that you're trying to achieve. I mean, it's just awesome. And is there a way that people can find you if they wanted to ask some questions or connect with you?
Sure. Yeah, my X is at Cambridge Hoddle. Same for my YouTube, and my Instagram is at, I don't know if there's an at on Instagram, but Fin Creighton, FINCREIGHTON. And then in all of my bios is the link for Sovereign Kind. So if you sign up, you will get an email instantly with access to the community. And then you'll get an email for the first 6 days that prompts you to start moving towards sovereignty from being stuck or feeling stuck to sovereignty.
Right. I will add links again to everything. Check out his work, check out his X. It's great stuff. I mean, you posted something about, the fourth inning earlier today, and I was just thinking about that literally like 15 minutes before I saw your post. So I mean, it's just super cool stuff. So if you found this episode valuable, share it with someone who's maybe stressing about the same thing as you, stressing about whether or not they'll ever be able to afford a house, because chances are you might not even need to worry. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in to the Orange Peel podcast. Remember to stay curious, stay skeptical, and stay orange pilled. I will see you next episode.